Okay, good afternoon. This is Brian Lance. I'm here for our Saturday meeting here in Houston, Texas. This is the 14th of October, and we'll be discussing Christopher Columbus and the voyage then and the voyage now to China. President Trump is going to be visiting China starting in early November, but that voyage has already begun. So I first want to turn to a letter, a frightening letter, frightening for Robert Swan Mueller III, released Friday the 13th, addressed to the Honorable Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Bob Goodlatte, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, calling for, signed by 19 congressmen, 4 of them from Texas, and additionally Congressman Robert Abram from Louisiana. And they call, these 19 congressmen call for the convening, they say, to immediately convene a public and open hearing or series of hearings to bring Mr. Mueller and his team out of the shadows and into the public square. Their point being that this special counsel has been empowered, but has never been placed before the Congress for review. It has sweeping authority, obvious potential conflicts of interest, allegations of public bias, and so forth. So this is a very important letter, kind of shot across the bow, and it comes just 2 weeks after the release of our dossier on Mueller, which is now also out in print. Robert Mueller, an amoral legal assassin. He will do his job if you let him. This has now been widely distributed on Capitol Hill, and likewise going out across the United States. And we certainly urge you to help in that distribution and creating a broad public debate now, with the intention of freeing up President Trump, freeing him up to actually carry out the kinds of policies that would reinvigorate, renew the United States as a sovereign nation in conjunction with the Belt and Road Initiative, in collaboration with other countries. So on the Belt and Road, let me just mention that November 3rd through November 14th, President Trump will be in Asia. As I think most of you know, we've published this in the end of 2014. The new Silk Road becomes the world land bridge. This has been the Bible for the development of the over $1 trillion Belt and Road Initiative program. Trump is going there. He'll be visiting China on an official state visit at the invitation of President Xi Jinping of China. He'll be visiting first Japan, South Korea, and after his state visit to China, we'll be at the APEC summit in Vietnam of the APEC nations, the Asian Pacific nations, and then we'll be at the ASEAN summit in the Philippines. So this is an extraordinary trip, and even the world, just this last week, I don't have it here in front of me, but just this last week, the IMF and World Bank were meeting in Washington, D.C., as they normally do at this time of the year. And it's rightfully said that they really were meeting on the sidelines of the Belt and Road. They themselves were discussing the Belt and Road, and the president of the World Bank emphasized that this was a great opportunity for integration and collaboration, and we should grab it. He's an American. So this just gives you a sense of the overall dynamic here. And if President Trump is freed up, you know, there's a cartoon that's comparing him to being like in Gulliver's Travels, Gulliver being tied down by the Lilliputians with hundreds of ropes. You can kind of imagine it in your mind that this is the situation that Trump is now in. Obviously, he needs guidance as well. We're providing that guidance, but the potential is great. So I'll leave it there. We can come back to that. Let's go to the first slide here. The likeness later in life of Christopher Columbus, who, as you know, launched his voyage roughly 525 years ago, and lived, if I have his, well, I'll come back to it. Oh yeah, born in 1451 approximately, died in 1506, born in Genoa, Italy, not a Portuguese, but an Italian. But you'll see the Portuguese played an extraordinary role. Columbus's mission was a mission to China. That was his mission. And the New World was found in the process. This was a moonshot, really an Apollo project. And we'll get into that a little bit in brief. But the idea was really the circumnavigation of the globe. It was known that China could be reached, Cathay as it was called then, traveling to the east from Europe, and those trips had been made even before Marco Polo, and vice versa. And there had even been visits starting in the early 14th century, that is in the 1300s. There were visits from the papacy to China and from China to Europe. So that process was already underway. But what lie, and did anything lie, to the west? I think really you have to put this in the context, and go to the next slide, of the Council of Florence itself, which moved from Ferrara, Italy, 1437, 1438, to Florence, 1439, already the center of the Renaissance. This is a painting of the delegation by Gozzoli. This is, I think, in the Medici Chapel in Florence, of the delegations coming in from Russia, what we now know as Russia, Ukraine, Russia, Kiev, coming in from Greece with such leaders as Platon, who played a very important role, and of course from throughout Europe. The idea was the unification of the world, the known world at that time. But this is the context, the reunification of the Christian church, but in the context of a broader formulation. Only a few years earlier, in 1433, this the Council of Florence is 1439, Cardinal Nicholas of Cuse had finished his Concordancia Catholica, which profoundly and originally put forward the concept of God's world, God's creation, from the standpoint of man's nature as being made by God, of being made by reason, of natural law, the laws of the universe, what could be comprehended by reason, that all men and women, all people are equally endowed with these powers of reason, and therefore the only laws that could be considered true and just were the laws made by those people themselves as shaped by their reason, not arbitrary democracy, but through reason itself. And this guided the Council of Florence. You can go on, I think, to the next slide, if I recall correctly. Well, this is an early painting from the Renaissance, which embodied the kind of breakthroughs that were going on artistically at the time as well. Go on to the next slide. This is Nicholas of Cuse, or Nicholas of Cusa. And go on to the next. And this is a collaborator of Cus, Toscanelli, Filippini, who's there on the right. Paolo Toscanelli was a leading mathematician, astronomer, cardiologist, or not cardiologist, cartographer, based in Florence, based in Italy. He and Cus had actually studied together at the University of Padua, so their friendship goes far back. And Toscanelli is a key link directly to Columbus himself and the origins of the mission to the New World. On to the next. I want to bring in here another element into this picture. Speaking of Cus and this vision in terms of the world and man's role in the world and the unification of the world. I want to bring in Prince Henry of Portugal, the third son of King John of Portugal. He passed in 1460. Prince Henry initiated the school of Sagres for the development of what became the ocean-going capabilities of European navigation and seamanship, and brought together there at the School of Sagres the leading scientists, including from the Islamic world, the leading astronomers, navigators, and so forth, to develop the capabilities to master the Atlantic, as we know it today as the Atlantic. His older brother, Prince Henry, in 1425, was occupied with a 4-year trip throughout Europe, including, importantly, to Florence, where he met at length with Toscanelli and the circles gathered in Florence, the center of the Renaissance, and played a very important role in further developing the relationship between Portugal and Florence in the domain of science and statecraft. Here we have a map, and I just wanted to give you a sense very quickly here of what we now know they're dealing with. These two halves of the map are just the shifts in the winds in January, the shifts in the winds in July. That's really not so important for what we're going to be discussing here. But the Portuguese at that time, Prince Henry himself, known as the Navigator, Prince Henry the Navigator, were most intrigued with what they called Libya, what we call Africa today. And the question of mastering the seamanship, capabilities of astronomy and navigation, that would allow them to venture down the coast of Africa. And they felt that essentially at Benin, below Guinea, the big part of Africa that comes out at us, comes out to the west, that hump, if you will. That once you rounded that hump, you might be in the Indian Ocean, what we now sort of consider the Indian Ocean, right? That you would round it there. But you see here, I'll kind of give you an idea. If you look at the map to the right, you'll notice if you come down from Spain, Portugal, here we have it here, right, Spain and Portugal. If you come down and you're carrying along those winds, that's bringing you down the coast. But then what happens in the middle, right at that point there of where Benin, Guinea, and so forth are? It's called the doldrums. You know what the doldrums are? Well, it gives you an idea of what they really were. Ships could sit out there for months with no wind. Because if you see it, you have winds coming north, those blue arrows, and you have blue arrows coming south, and they meet in the middle, and you're just stuck there. All right. So this was a problem, which was mastered by the development of course, of increasing understanding of astronomy, to be able to gauge not only your latitude but your longitude. But also, what was required was to develop a new kind of ship. Go on to the next slide. This is a caravel. And rather than the square mast you think of even in clipper ships, square masted, squared, at a 90-degree angle to the mast. You see that these are at roughly 45 degrees to the mast. But they're also very mobile in terms of being able to move them along their yard. The boom can swing, right? As opposed to the set in place mass of the ships built, including more ships that came along later, that were built to go with the trade winds. Simply to go with the trade winds. If you have to go against the trade winds, you've got to develop the capacity to tack into the wind, right? People that know a little bit about sailing in terms of craft today, sports sailing and so forth, understand this idea of tacking, zigzagging against the wind, which this kind of sail and the sails that came after it, lateen sails, as they're called, allow you to do. These ships, the caravels, were developed. Lateen sails existed long before, but these ships were developed with a low keel, that is, they didn't sit deep in the water. They were developed by Prince Henry's school, Sagre's school, and these ships, you might look familiar to this. This is very close to the kind of ship that Columbus sailed with several decades later. So with these ships, if you go back to the last one, just to get a sense here, in very broad brushstrokes, what the sailors did was to sail out, farther out, rather than trying to stick to the coast. They sailed further out, further and further out, like 1,000 miles out, and then would tack back and zigzag back and forth and carry down to the south. Again, not easy, but this is the method they developed, and then also a kind of roughing foot coming back to catch these trade winds back. These are coming up and they're coming over. Just to give you a rough idea. I'm not trying to give a navigational class here. So now go on to the next. Now there's some problems going to the next step. Now the problems were not simply in terms of the mechanics of sailing or the development of the use of the astrolabe and other navigation equipment at sea, which the quadrant, for example. That was something that was mastered by the school, Prince Henry School. However, the problem was also in the mind. A work that was published by Nicholas of Coos in the context really of the Council of Florence was his major work on learned ignorance. Now we all know what ignorance is. Learned ignorance is the recognition of put it simply, of recognition of the limit of your knowledge, the limit of my knowledge. And to bear that in mind, but more importantly, or profoundly, it's based on this concept, the recognition of the creative process of the human mind to rise above ignorance, to discover natural law. Obviously, if you're full of pride, right, you never learn. Is a simple way of putting it, right? That reflection is a critical component. What am I getting at? Well, this is a map of Ptolemy, of the world. All right. Now that's you see here Europe, the upper left-hand side. You see this is Libya, Africa. You see here coming out of Spain, Gibraltar coming down the coast, detailed, and then everything kind of fades out the further you get away. You also see, you know, a striking knowledge of Arabia, further east, India, and so on and so forth are drawn in there. Anything otherwise noteworthy in this map that really kind of stands out?
It looks like an eighth of a
An eighth of a
it looks like a lot. The Indian Peninsula, like the land goes all the way across.
Right, that's right. Joe just said that across the bottom there, that's not an accident. That's not just something that was kind of filled in. Ptolemy's view, this is the Aristotelian view, if you will, the notion of a fixed knowledge, you know, a prideful knowledge. Ptolemy was the head of the school in Alexandria, Egypt, after in the decay of Egypt from its high point, and he asserts, as was asserted at the time, that this is the known world, and that this world is enclosed. This is the known land of the earth, even though the approximate circumference of the earth was known. The view was that the rest of it was just water. Or, you know, of course, you might fall off the edge too, you know, if you didn't, you didn't yet comprehend it was a sphere. And so the idea was, no, there's nowhere else to go. There's nothing to be discovered. This is the world. This is the universe. And so this is what had to be overcome. One of the important aspects of the Council of Florence and the development of the Council of Florence, the attempt to unify the Christian world, but really beyond, is that Platon from Greece, Nicholas Cus went to Constantinople on orders of King Pope Eugene IV with the delegation, and brought back the Greek delegation, including the head of the Eastern churches. Platon came back, one of the greatest minds of that period of Constantinople, and Platon brought with him a knowledge of Strabo, the cartographer, map maker, astronomer, to the west. And let's move on to the next slide here. Now this is Strabo, a reiteration of Strabo's map there. May look a little strange to you. Here is Europe. Here's Libya. See, all of it is Libya. You know, Africa, what we know here is the African continent. And of course, here's Asia. But notice in the map, the importance of the map here for our discussion here briefly, is notice the southern tip of Libya. There is a tip. It is not enclosed, not the body of water of the Indian Ocean and so forth is not locked in, right? It's not enclosed. You can circumnavigate the tip of Libya. Right? So the argument here was, what Strabo had developed and presented, and his knowledge goes back. I mean, we have, for example, we have Herodotus, right? We have reports in his histories in the 5th century BC that King Necho of Egypt in the 7th century BC had sent Phoenician navy on a trip to, in fact, circumnavigate what we would now call the African continent, and they did, according to Herodotus. Right, so we have that record. So this is not, Strabo was not arguing, he was presenting new knowledge. He was presenting, a concept of the known world, which raised the questions of how to, in fact, explore it and develop it, to participate in creation. So now, Columbus himself, in 1476, remember the trip to the New World, his first trip, 4 trips, was in 1492. His trip to the New World, that's not the beginning of his travels. In 1476, he was shipwrecked in Portugal. He was then 25 years old. And he settled there for a period of approximately 10 years and married. And he became the friend of Fernando Martin, which we'll come back to in a second. And it's there that Columbus, Italian by birth, learned the ocean-going navigation techniques of the Portuguese School of Some Grades. Go on to the next slide. All right, now, so we're going to fill in another part of the picture here now, briefly. We're going to return to Toscanelli, the friend of Nicholas Cruise, also the friend and close associate of Fernando Martin. And in fact, Fernando Martin of Spain or of Portugal, he was the canon of Lisbon. He was the confessor to the Pope. They're the executors of the well of Nicholas of Cruise, 2 of his closest friends. Well, as a result of the discovery, a negative discovery, that had been made by the Portuguese in the 1470s, that they were not able to find the southern tip of Africa. That is, they had not yet solved the problem of sailing south and rounding the tip of Cape of, I always mix the 2 up, the Cape of Good Hope. Yeah. That wasn't done until 1488. But having been unable to proceed south, they once again were entertaining the idea of sailing west. Well, if you can't go south, what about going west? In other words, they were operating outside of the Ptolemaic view. They were saying, okay, we know the world is a sphere. We can potentially sail west. Can we do this? And so Martin, on behalf of the King of Portugal, sends a letter to Toscanelli in Florence, asking him to answer these questions. And let me just stop here, just parenthetically, and say why, in fact, are we partly discussing all this? Well, if you're not aware, over the course of the last week or 2, there's been a campaign against Christopher Columbus law. This is a campaign involving the so-called Antifa, so-called anti-fascist movement. We should remind ourselves that in the 1920s, the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, waged a campaign to stop the construction of monuments to Columbus, to prevent the celebration of his the anniversary of his landing in the New World, and so on. A national campaign in their national press at the time. Right, and in the 1920s, KKK was a big thing. So here we are now, in 2017, and now we have a so-called left organization, and we have accompanying politicians, such as the mayor of New York City and others, passing resolutions declaring Indigenous Day instead of Columbus Day. And we have the beheading of statues of Columbus. The statue here in Houston was painted, with paint was spilled all over it. I mean, not accidentally, I mean, drenched in paint. Similar incidences occurring around the country. And part of the point here is to elevate the discussion to what was actually involved in with this exploration, which discovered the New World. That this was a moonshot. This was mankind navigating the globe, taking in the whole globe, and drawing on the best knowledge of the Arab world, of European knowledge, of Greek knowledge, and we'll also see through China, the knowledge of China. So Toscanelli's letter back to Fernand Martin, this is in 1474, Greeks him and so on and so forth, and says, I therefore send you, you can turn the, I'm sorry, I'm turn off the light here so people can see this map more clearly. I therefore send His Majesty a chart drawn by my own hand. That's what we have here, a reproduction of here, on which I have indicated the western coastline from Ireland in the north to the end of Denny. Right? That's basically here. Right? And then a guesswork going on down, I guess you could say. And the islands that lie along the path, the Azores, Canary Island, and so forth. Opposite them, directly to the west, I've indicated the beginning of India, together with the islands and places that you will come to, how far you should keep from the Arctic Pole and the equator, and how many leagues you must cover before you come to these places. And I'll jump ahead here. There, now speaking of Cathay, China, there are said to be as many ships, mariners, and goods there as in the rest of the world put together, especially in the principal port of Zaiton, which is now thought to be Guangzhou, where they load and unload 100 great ships of pepper every year, not to mention many other ships with other spices. That country has many inhabitants, provinces, kingdoms, and innumerable cities, all of which are ruled by a prince known as the Great Khan, which in our language means the King of Kings, who mainly resides in the province of Cathay. His forefathers greatly desired to make contact with the Christian world, and some 200 years ago they sent ambassadors to our Pope, asking him to send them many learned men who can instruct them in our faith. But these ambassadors met with difficulties on the way and had to turn back without reaching Rome. In the days of Pope Eugenius, there came an ambassador to him who told him, Pope Eugene IV, who told him of their great feelings of friendship for the Christians. I had a long conversation with the ambassador, Toscanelli. This is in 1433. I had a long conversation, that's when the discussion was. I had a long conversation with the ambassador about many things, about the vast size of the royal buildings, about the amazing length and breadth of the rivers, about the great number of cities on their banks. So great a number that along one river there were 200 cities with very long, wide bridges and so forth and so on. There are also many scholars, philosophers, astronomers, and other men skilled in the natural sciences who govern that great kingdom and conduct its wars. So that's a little bit from the letter. This is Toscanelli writing about his conversation in 1433 with the Chinese delegation in Florence, who had met with Pope Eugene IV for similar conversations. So 1433, 1439, you begin to get a sense here of the kind of deliberation, kind of dialogue, meeting of minds that was going on in the precincts of Florence, but radiating out around the world and also coming in from around the world. Now, Toscanelli then writes a letter to Columbus, the personal friend of Martin, who's been for 10 years in Portugal, and he's still there at the time. And he's writing him because he received a letter from Columbus with an emissary here of the world, as he conceived it, asking for Toscanelli's advice on sailing west. Huh? So here's Toscanelli's letter, or bits of it. We published this, I mean, it's available. Toscanelli's letter to Columbus, this is in 1480. Paul, the physician, to Christopher Columbus, greeting. That's Paolo Toscanelli, Paul, the physician. Because Paolo Toscanelli was originally a doctor. That was his degree at the university, physician. Greetings. I received your letters with the things that you sent me, and with them received great satisfaction. I continue here. It pleases me much that I should be well understood, for the voyage is not only possible, it is true and certain to be honorable and to yield incalculable profit and a very great fame among all Christians. But you cannot know this perfectly, save through experience and practice, as I have had in the form of the most copious and good and true information from distinguished men of great learning who have come here to the court of Rome, which was then located in Florence. The court itself had Florence at that time. From the said parts and from others being merchants who have had business for a long time in those parts, men of high authority. Thus, when that voyage shall be made, it will be to powerful kingdoms and cities and most noble provinces, very rich in all manner of things, in great abundance, and very necessary to us. And the letter continues. So this is the dialogue and discussion going on that frames then Columbus's voyage. And you see here, I always want to get the Pongu, roughly pronounced, is Japan. What we know today is Japan. This is Japan. Here's the coast of China, which they understood from sailing east, right? Here is the Azores, the Canary Islands, of course, what they knew of Africa at that point, Europe, and so on and so forth. So next slide, Mike. Okay, now I don't know if you can see this clearly. I hope this comes across to our viewers are streaming this. But this is an overlay of where they saw Japan from relative to North America. Do you see it in the background there in blue, light blue? So you get the idea of the overlays of what we know now about the world as opposed to how they conceived. All right. Let's go on to the next. And that's another way of looking at it. Here you see what was known of Africa is stripped with the beginning, down to roughly Benin, which was known. And then and this overlay. Overlay under it or over it, however you want to think about it. I guess you would say that under it is our over it is roughly there of what was known and what they didn't understand, right? So this was this discovery of this enormous discovery of the Americas, entirely new continent, that exploded into view. Continue on to the next. Christopher Columbus, another a more stereotypical painting. There's no actual existing paintings from his way. We don't know what he actually looked like. So these are rough approximations from what comes down to knowledge. Go ahead. So back to Columbus here, and here's this, the trips into the New World, the arrival where they arrived roughly. This, of course, is the island now split between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Of course, Cuba, Puerto Rico is here, and so on and so forth, right? Central America, and the color bar, the first is the purple, That was his first voyage, and then the second, third, and fourth voyages are overlaid there. I'm not going to try to go through the particulars of it, but I now do want to turn quickly to this the question of what they found there, because part of this entire attack on Columbus, and what really makes it clear, this is not so much an attack on Columbus as an attack on you. Is the story that's been put out there that most of us have grown up with over the last few decades is this idea that the Spaniards coming to the New World was a massacre, was a slaughter, was genocide. And this has been promoted over the last several decades is pop culture knowledge. And in school, yeah, sure, in school, yeah, promoted in the school. So I'll deal briefly with the Aztecs in a moment, because that comes up. And it's not to say that the Spaniards did everything right by a long shot. However, just to make the point just right now, as a result of the missions into the New World and the building of cities throughout Central America, Mexico, and so on, the population of the region grew. That a process of involution and collapse that was going on, as witnessed the cannibalism, human sacrifice, and so forth of the Indian populations there, the Aztecs against the surrounding population. But many of the surrounding tribes were also cannibals and engaged in human sacrifice, which is why the capital of the Aztecs was on an island, was an island in the middle of the lake, was because they were surrounded by enemies. This was a devolving process, and was collapsing in on itself, which is why a few hundred Spaniards basically, supposedly, quote unquote, conquered Mexico. But let me just turn here. This is a biography of Columbus by Felipe Fernandez Armesto. It's a horrible biography, completely cynical about Columbus and so on and so forth. But since I happen to have it, unfortunately, I will read something to you. And it relates to the map, not the details of the map, but to what he found on that first voyage. This is recorded in a letter by the expedition's physician, Diego Alvarez Chanca. So here I'll read from this letter. Excuse the content in a certain area, but I think it's worth reading. This is a letter from the expedition's physician, and he's describing what they found when they got to the coast of Hispaniola, we now know as Hispaniola Island. The first voyage. We inquired of the women who were prisoners of the inhabitants what sort of people these islanders were, and they answered Caribs. Caribbean people. Caribs. As soon as they learned that we abhor such things of people because of their evil practice of eating human flesh, they felt delighted. They told us that the Carib men used them with great cruelty, such as would scarcely be believed, and that they eat the children which they bear them, only bringing up those whom they have by their native wives. Such of their male enemies as they can take away alive, they bring here to their homes to make a feast of them. And those who are killed in battle, they eat up after the fighting is over. They declare that the flesh of men is so good to eat, that nothing can compare with it in the world. And this is quite evident, for of the human bones we found in the houses, everything that could be gnawed had already been gnawed, so that nothing remained but what was too hard to eat. in one of the houses, we found a man's nick cooking in a pot, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. And none of this is that I'm saying this is a modern, biography, but even here, this is put on the table.
They spoke the same language?
No, well, I can't say that I know the whole story, but yeah, because there had been interchange going on. There were native people in the region that spoke or had some knowledge of a language closely related to Portuguese, or at least that was a starting point. And then from there, one tribe could help translate with another. And so Columbus, very early on in his first voyage, had on board a translator. I believe it was a woman, if I remember right, who was translating, helping to translate with the various peoples in the region. So one could just look into the history of the first voyage and get the story there.
Hispaniola is Cuba?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, got it.
That's the Dominican Republic in Haiti, the island of Hispaniola. That was the name for them in the native language of the people of this people on Hispaniola. Caribs. The other side.
Okay.
The consumers, or however you want to say it. Yeah, right. Yeah. Early equivalent of George Soros and Brennan. Yes, sir. Oh, well, you can imagine who gave that name to it. The Spanish gave it the name, yeah. Yeah. Okay, sure.
And Haiti is, I was taught that Haiti is the native given to the island by those natives, the Taínos and other Caribbean. That means high mountain.
Okay.
And Hispaniola means Petit Espagne, as means little Spain.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, okay, so on to the Aztecs, very briefly. What do we have? Well, this is just, just a broader sense. Again, the trips to the New World, and Columbus was largely sailing along the trade winds, or along, the currents, winds going across from the east to west, and then he would go north and go back the other direction. But these are other trips, Magellan, around the Magellan Straits, towards the tip of South America. That was in the 1580s. The earlier, or 1520s. The early trip in, I believe it was 1488, around the tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. All this began to be mastered, really an explosion of voyages, new knowledge, and a mapping, of course, of the New World in the process, at least an outline. But now turning, going to the next, I don't want to leave anything out. We'll come to our friend here in a moment. Jinju, the Admiral Jinju. Let's go back to the, you can turn on the light or whatever's appropriate here. But in terms of the Valley of Mexico, what was discovered by the Spaniards was the Aztecs, who at that time ruled in the valley, the primary area of Mexico, and had arrived there in 1325, which kept calendars. It's known when they arrived, and they knew when they arrived. They had a calendar system. And there, the Aztecs created a brutal tribute system. And I want to just address briefly some of the points made. We published in 1992, which was the 500th anniversary of Columbus's first voyage, in our magazine Fidelio, a full issue devoted to Columbus and Council of Florence, Columbus, and so on and so forth. So a lot of documentation there. And we've linked this on the webcast because the issue of this magazine was available free. It's available in PDF. And so you can get the individual articles as well as the magazine by going to this webcast today. But I want to just review briefly the issue of population density. The argument is made that the population of central Mexico, based on some simple extrapolation, like the total number of warriors that the Aztecs had under their command, is the best records show, which is not accurate, but taking that as a starting point, and then multiplying that by 6, that is estimating that there's 6 people per household for each warrior, which is a pretty incredible figure to assume. Anyway, you rapidly reach the notion that the capital of the Aztec civilization, Tenochtitlan, had a population of 300,000, and that by similar extrapolations, the population of central Mexico was 25 million at the time of the arrival of the Spaniards. Now, to give you an idea, for the population of the capital, this, which was 13.5 kilometers in size, this would have meant that there would have been 45 square meters per person on the island. Now, that doesn't kind of strike you. If you took the entire population of the world today and put it in Texas, every person would have 100 square meters. For central Mexico, if you have 219,915 square kilometers in central Mexico, a population of 25 million people, there would have been 116 inhabitants per square kilometer. That's twice that of 1985. Twice the population of central Mexico in 1985. Twice. Yes, yes. I mean, if you can go today, I mean, besides studies, I just went to Wikipedia just to see what they currently say. These are the figures. These are the 300,000, 220 to 300,000 on the island, and so on and so forth. Tenochtitlan. I know I'm butchering the pronunciation. The capital, right? The island capital of the Aztecs. Yes, yes. This was the capital on an island. They were embattled. They were surrounded. They would go out in raiding parties. I mean, huge numbers of people that were sacrificed, and these were largely captives, on these raiding missions. At the time of the Spanish arrival, at the end of the 15th century, beginning of the 16th century. But this is the extrapolated population, according to the anthropologists and so forth, of the population density of the capital and of the Valley of Mexico. That is what we would think of the populated areas in Mexico. Right? Yeah. Well, yes, and beginning of the 1500s. Yes, right. Further, if you extend the Aztecs ruled roughly, I mean, if you call it ruling, but dominated a region that extended all the way through Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua. So if you take into account that, that's another 282,282 square kilometers. So that you then have just shy of 500,000 square kilometers. If you take the total area of the Valley of Mexico, the whole extent of the empire, right? So then you're talking about a population of 50 people per square kilometer. Now, this is under condition, and that's an extraordinary population. I think that's, I'm talking about something like the population density, well, not of New York City, but of the New York and New Jersey area or something like that would probably be something. No, we're not accepting this. This is ridiculous. This is absurd because the question of, as LaRouche has developed this very rigorously, you don't look at population density. You look at what LaRouche calls potential relative population density. You have to take into account the relative fertility of the soil, conditions, and so forth. And you're looking at it from the standpoint of potential. That is, what is the capability of the society today to produce for tomorrow? Now, what was the productive capacity of Aztec civilization? Well, it was roughly about 16 people per square kilometer at best. 16, 18, you could go overboard and say 20 max. There was no animal husbandry. There was no metallurgy outside of some gold. Gold was the soft metal that they could do for ornamental purposes. It was a society based on concept that any day the world could end, literally. That the universe had been through 4 distinct deaths and recreations, and no one knew when the next death of the world would occur. And it could occur and might occur and probably would occur at night. And it could occur through the invasion of the peoples surrounding the Aztec capital civilization, from outside. And therefore, you had to prepare and be prepared to fight nocturnal battles. And the means of doing that was, think of Count Dracula, blood, human blood, to strengthen oneself, so to speak, for nocturnal battle, to defend yourself. And sacrifices otherwise were made, in terms of sacrifice, to ensure that the sun came up the next day. So you think of the actual, mental life, the lifespans, which were incredibly short, in the 20s and 30s, and the fact that there was no animal husbandry, there was no milk, cheese in the diet, with the exception of cannibalism. It was a vegetarian diet, ironically. That on the capital island, they consumed large amounts of algae, which they got from the lake, but there was no plumbing. So human species and so forth was mixed in the lake, right? So there was an incredibly high rate of death from gastrointestinal diseases. So this is really, a sad devolution, but not something that we should comprehend in a different way today. What we're seeing right now is the implosion, over the last few decades, the implosion of Western civilization in the transatlantic region, and a certain kind of, what we call cannibalism or predatory practices, where people are, turning on each other. The 1% versus the 99%, however you want to think about it. And think of all the centrifugal forces that are generated, that just tend to pull our society apart. And I think that's a certain window to understand what was going on there. So then alongside of that was, I just mentioned briefly, and it's developed much more. One can read about it. It's not just the Spaniards begin building towns and cities, and so there was an immediate beginning of a transformation of the whole process. The populations were freed from this devolutionary set of practices. Of course, over time, over generations, but nonetheless, that began. And again, not to say that the Spaniards were angels or something, but the point is that this is what was there, this is what was found, and the attempts to paint the discovery of the New World and all that it opened up, put in all the work that needed to be done, as somehow evil, is just, it's just turning the, it's what Bertrand Russell said that he was out to do, which was to create a world in which children believed that snow was black. It's really turning the world upside down. But the broader point of discussing this is to realize that this is, an assault on us. That the question of mankind's future development depends on the kind of collaboration we're talking about here. And so I'd like to go on to the next, just very briefly. I'm just going to run through this in less than 5 minutes. This is Zheng He, whose voyages, 1405, 1433, were, say, the start of the discovery of the New World. A Muslim, fleet admiral, diplomat, eunuch. He lived from 1371 to 1435, roughly, and he commanded the voyages of the fleet that was created by the Ming dynasty to visit the known world. Go on to the next slide. And this is of their voyages. There was a total of 7 voyages from 1405 to 1433, including up the Red Sea, to Jeddah, and near to where Mecca is. And that's all recorded in history and it's known. The voyages are all known throughout the region. There's all kinds of evidence of these voyages, which are not secret. And it was in the voyage of 1433, most likely, that then a delegation from Admiral Boyd traveled on up to Italy, and the meeting with the Eugene IV and with Toscanelli and others. Go on to the next. This is them coming back. You notice to the right, you kind of see it there, a giraffe. You see the giraffe? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, go on to the next. This is the giraffe, imagined back and brought back to the capital in China. On board the ship. Go on to the next. This is a model of one of the ships, square rigged, because they were flying. They were flying. they were going with the current, the trade winds, and the currents. These are large ships, very large. Go on to the next. That's a model of a mid-sized ship, a mock-up or a modern rebuild of the ship, and you can get that's a medium-sized treasure ship, what they call treasure ship, a large ship. Go on to the next. This is the inside of one of those ships, just to give you a sense of the dimension. The next one, that's another one of these treasure ships, rebuilt, of course. You can see the number of masts and so on. Go on to the next. They were multi-hull, they were compartmentalized. It was the first time. So if they received a blow or something to the ship, the compartments were sealed, so it didn't sink the entire ship. Here's one of the caravels or the carracks, maybe of the Santa Maria was a carrack. It's kind of an updated version of the caravel of Christopher Columbus versus the size of one of Zheng He's big treasure ships, just to give you an understanding of the comparison in size. These voyages involve, it's estimated 200 ships. There's estimates as many as 1,000 ships, but that probably is a little bit hyperbolic. But this is not hyperbole. This is the actual size of one of the treasures. I'll send it to you. It's not a secret. No, I just went on Google. You know, I just Google images. You know, look under Kung Hu's ships and something like that. Yeah, treasure ship, China treasure ships. Yeah. Go on to the next. On the New Belt Road today. Right? We haven't talked about it, but we've discussed it in many prior events. This is what was announced by China in 2013, and is what we have not only promoted, but we're saying has to be extended into the world land bridge. And that hopefully is where we're now sailing. But the Belt and Road Initiative out of China, each of those spots is one of the corridors of development, including down into Indonesia and on across in terms of the maritime Silk Road. The blue map, if you can see them, is the maritime Silk Road that's extended into Africa, that's financed the building of new modern railroads in Ethiopia and Kenya and so forth, up into Mongolia and Russia, on across the Eurasian land bridge, which we had promoted in the 90s. It's now a reality coming to be, and so forth. This is the new Silk Road of China, referencing back to the Silk Road between Europe and Africa, China and Africa, and China and Europe, that span thousands of years, and which really we can say that Columbus's voyages to the New World was the effort to complete that maritime Silk Road around the world. So I think I'll end the presentation with that. We can come back to China another time, but China's trips certainly played a role, as Toscanelli quotes them at length, in inspiring the trips to the West, ever West. Questions? Comments?
I would presume
Uh-huh.
the Aztecs had to have been a evolution of a previous culture.
Well, that's I'm not an I'm not an expert in that area, but the Olmecs, there were many cultures, earlier cultures. Evidence that we have of that, hard evidence, is in terms of astronomy. The Aztecs had a knowledge of astronomy in terms of calendars, very rigorously kept cycles within cycles, and so on and so forth. Over certain, but they only used it for ritual. So, which leads one to believe that they would not have been able to develop this knowledge themselves, that this was knowledge from an earlier civilization. I mean, there was the Maya civilization, there was earlier civilization, and was passed down to them. And by the time they had gotten it, it was just it was ritual. It wasn't active scientific knowledge. It wasn't connected to navigation, for example. They were not a seagoing civilization at all. Yes.
So, review once again the journey of the dynasty. There were 7 major ones, right?
Yeah.
And they,
That's a whole nother. Well, the Chinese, I mean, they were very important. I mean, it was China's major venture out into the world, right? I mean, if you think the one dynasty before, Kublai Khan and his son or his grandson and those that came out, that was a 100-year period. There was virtually no navigational exploration going on, and so on and so forth. With the Ming Dynasty, China's pulled back together again, and under this Muslim admiral, this great project was launched. These 7 trips between 1405 and 1433, and then they ended. but there was an element of gathering tribute. They wished other countries and so forth to pay tribute to, the kingdom, to China, to the Chinese emperor. We had the mandate of heaven, so to speak. But in large degree, they weren't about tribute. They were simply about trade, exchange, diplomacy, bringing gifts from China. The inventions of China. China had it in book form, what we would call books today. I mean, they invented, books and the publication of books and so forth. They had small books which, on agriculture, on mechanics, on all of these things which they would share with the people that they came upon. All of this knowledge was something was being widely distributed within their own society to develop their own productivity of their own people. And they in turn shared this with the people they visited, right? Including navigation, navigational sciences, astronomy. Not that any of their knowledge was perfect. I mean, but they obviously approached this with a certain Confucian, the sense of learned ignorance. They were learning as well. So, China today makes the point that unlike the West that colonized other people, right? That China went and came as friends and left as friends. It's a entirely different concept. So China is saying this is still the way we think today. We're not out to colonize. We're out for win-win cooperation, mutual benefit, and that's how we're proceeding with the Belt and Road Initiative. It's based on these same principles that we had expressed 600 plus years ago. Huh? The Chinese admiral, Admiral He? Yes, from 1405 to 1433. Well, there's well, there's a lot of evidence. There's been these various investigations, and just speak in general terms about it. Whether it was the Chinese or other people, we know that even, at least it can be hypothesized, even before the last ice age, roughly 100,000 years ago, there were voyages, there was navigational knowledge. You had the sea people, not only in the Mediterranean, but elsewhere. You have the Easter Island, monuments. You have all of this that's really still unexplained. So there's a lot of, we don't really know. What we can draw, and I'm not saying that this closes the door, quite the opposite, is that we know that civilizations have risen and fallen. And that's something to learn from. As opposed to the idea, that British have promoted, that all civilization came out of Sumer, Mesopotamia, came from essentially Babylon, that it's always been kings and so on and so forth that ruled, and the British Empire just happens to be the modern form of that, and so get used to it. That's the way the world is, That instead, that the history of navigation and with the history of astronomy points to the fact that man's development and the spread of civilization has been based on natural law, on the discovery of universal principles, as opposed to the imposition of empires, right? And so there's a lot to discover, as opposed to this attempt by anthropologists to either locate the start of civilization in empires, or to locate the beginning of civilization in something like the Aztecs. So.
How we now hit them boss or something. These modern guys, like the guy here in America, Robert shows you, he's claiming much more related to me. People like Swan say, no, the Egyptians built into the profile of civilization. I think he's wrong. I think the civilization before what we know is Egyptian. Because if you look at the layer on it, experts say that erosion of water, it hasn't been that wet for like 10,000 years.
Well, there's lots of hypotheses, Peter.
What Christopher Columbus was doing was not looking for new plants and animals. And so he was part of an effort to say the feudal society of Europe was degenerate. And we have to have a place where human society can be developed, where the discoveries of the Renaissance, the first in the society,
very good point.
Someplace where that concept of man could support. That's what Columbus is actually part of, as opposed to discovery for discovery's sake. What this was is that more of a political movement. How can we bring mankind from a feudal order that denies these people the right to their life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. No, that's a very, very, very important point. And the development of colonialism in the West was what they were trying to avert and trying to get out of. Because the Renaissance period, was winding down by the early 1500s. With Da Vinci and so forth, the light basically begins to go out. On the Renaissance, Venice has prevailed against Florence. There's the attempt to launch a republican form of government in France, which succeeded under Louis XI, Henry VII in England. But, that rapidly devolves into endless war, the 100 Years' War and then the 30 Years' War. And so then you have the escape, Plymouth Rock and so forth. You have John Winthrop, you have the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that literally, as they said, escape, because that was at the time of the 30 Years' War, to escape out of oligarchical mess in Europe. But that was the continuity, that was the continuation of Cusa, Toscanelli, Martini, Columbus, their effort. It's dilated. Is it on what you're pointing to? Absolutely. Okay, so we can wrap it up here. And, oh, sure.